I'm going to show you how to deal with a fire in your rental property. I've dealt with 3 fires in the last 25 years, and I dealt with the tenants myself. I dealt with the fire department. I dealt with the city, dealing with all the permits and stuff, insurance company. And there's a lot of good nuggets here. My name is Rich Carey. This is the Rich on Money podcast, and this is episode 14, How to Deal with a Effing Fire. We're going to start off by clarifying things you'll need to understand when you get insurance for your rental property. Sometimes called fire insurance, sometimes called landlord insurance. You need to know the difference between actual cash value and replacement cost value. You may have a cheaper policy that's got the one that's less cool, and there's one that's way better. And I think the better one is the replacement cost value, right? That's the one where you get full cost of replacement when something burns down, when something gets damaged, when something needs to be replaced. You get full replacement value. Doesn't matter how old it is. But you may have a policy, especially a cheaper insurance company or a policy that you tried to get cheaper and they sneak this in on you. You may just be covered for actual cash value. What that means is you get the depreciated worth of the damaged property. In the case of a roof that got damaged or a roof that had hail damage, that could be something like the new roof cost $12,000, but the roof was 25 years old and they're going to give you $1,000 instead, and you make up the difference yourself. That sucks. So make sure you understand that before you have a fire, because there'll be a huge difference in how you get paid back and what you can do with that money, how far it'll take you. Get the replacement cost value, okay? Pay extra for it. Because if you don't get it, you'll probably have a couple of fires like I did, actually 3. Now, how do you find a good insurance company? We're talking about property insurance for a rental property, like landlord insurance, sometimes called fire insurance, and you start with the bigger companies. 2 of the claims that I dealt with were Travelers Insurance, and that's a pretty big company. And everything went really smooth with Travelers. If you could have Travelers, if they have fair prices and they work in your area, I'd recommend getting them, at least in 2025 and the near future. I've heard good things about them. Big companies, what do I think of here? Allstate, Farmers, State Farm, Geico, which uses a lot of other companies, Alpha, USAA, the military bank, right? I think they've got great insurance. You just got to get quotes from these companies. Go to your investment group. You probably have a real estate investment association in your city. Maybe it has a Facebook group. Maybe it meets once a month somewhere. Get in touch with them. Ask other investors what companies they're using. Sometimes these insurance agents go to these meetings and pitch their services. A lot of times, a lot of the investors are all using the same 1 or 2 companies. So pay attention. Now you got to talk about deductibles. You got a good company. You understand whether or not you're getting the depreciated value. What about deductibles? I have very high deductibles. So I may have a $5,000 deductible on a house that I bought, let's say for $60,000. And again, this is 10 years ago, but maybe now is worth like $150,000. I have a $5,000 deductible. If a roof needs to be replaced, I got to come $5,000 out of pocket for that. The truth is I probably won't file a claim for just a roof. I won't file a claim for many, many things that would cost, I don't know, $8,000, $9,000 or less, because I don't want to use that deductible and have a claim on my record, right? Once you have a claim on your record, your insurance can go up. People don't want to insure you. It causes problems. And we'll talk more about that later. When you have a high deductible, it makes your rates lower because they know that you're not going to use it for frivolous little things. You're going to use it for like a total loss. You're going to use it for a big fire, and you're not worried about these little nitnoy things. And that's how I've always operated. But you don't have to have a high deductible. If your financial situation is tighter, maybe your deductible is $500 or $1,000, and you would use your insurance for a bigger loss, like a roof. Now let's talk about rebuild cost. And I mean, this comes up when you have a property catch on fire. I'll talk about my fires, but just to go through them, I kind of had a small fire contained to one room. It was a couch that burned, and the couch went up in flames, smoke throughout the house, and then it just went out and the house didn't burn down. I had one started in an attic and burned the attic and some surrounding areas in the attic. And even though it was contained due to a number of issues, it ended up being a pretty big rehab on the whole house. And then one burned down like a quarter of the house and was pretty much a rebuild because of all the smoke damage and stuff. But rebuild costs. And what I mean by that is when you get insurance, and again, I'll use my properties as examples, and you're going to be like, oh, your properties are cheap. Well, it's just a scale issue. Triple it or add a 0 or whatever you got to do. But in some of my properties, let's say I bought it for $60,000. Maybe it's worth $150,000 today. But when you go to get insurance from, say, State Farm, and they're going to say, hey, if this house burns down and we got to rebuild it, then it's going to cost $300,000. And so we're basing the cost of your insurance off of $300,000. And this is your premium. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want $300,000. I only paid $50,000 for the house. But that's not really the point. And you'll realize that when the house needs to be rebuilt, because typically the way insurance is set up, you don't let it burn down and then just like take your money and walk away. It burns down, you get the money to rebuild it, and you bring that thing back to life. But pretty much everything inside is brand new. And since it burned down partially or all the way, you're probably putting in maybe putting in plumbing from scratch, probably for sure doing electric from scratch, which means everything's brought up to code, which means just a lot of money and a lot of time, all the way from the electric box to the wires to every single outlet, using new and modern equipment that may not have been necessary in a property that was 30 years old or even 100 years old. So the rebuild costs are a lot more because the rules are different on construction today than they were when you built your house. And also cost of materials and cost of labor are a lot more expensive than when your house was built. So that's how it works. Now, sometimes you can decide, especially if you're like me and you paid cash for your houses and there's no loan, you can say, look, I paid $50,000 for this house. It's worth $150,000. Okay, you said $300,000, but will you let me insure it for less? And what I've noticed is insurance companies will allow you to insure it for either 90% of that amount or 80% of that amount and lower your premium by about that much, by about 20%, 10 or 20%. And so I've usually done that. I've taken it down 20% to 80% of the rebuild cost. Can I do the math in my head? $240,000 instead of $300,000. And if I'm doing the math right, 20% less. I went ahead and did that. And one thing again that you'll notice when you rebuild a property, if it's a small fire or a quarter of the house, and it's not just like burned to the ground, or the house is like brick, so the brick's still there, you're not really building it from the ground up. So you're not going to need all that money to rebuild the house because you're not dealing with a flat piece of land and just building it from scratch. You might be gutting the place, like, maybe taking all the drywall out and rewiring and maybe doing plumbing, but you're not really building it from the ground up. And so in a lot of cases with partial fire, structure's not completely flattened, you're not going to spend all that money. Now, of course, you want to have enough money if that ends up happening. If it's seriously leveled to the ground and you got to clear it away and start from scratch, you got to have enough money. But just something to consider. I'm going to talk about which large companies are actually good for fires. And what I mean by that is easy to deal with, don't give you a lot of hassle, don't try to get out of paying. That is something that you can talk to contractors about. Contractors, busy contractors in your city that deal with fire insurance claims, that deal with roof claims on a routine basis, that have experience working with these companies, working with Allstate, working with State Farm, working with Travelers, working with USAA, Alpha, right? They're going to tell you, they're going to know, right? And you're going to hear themes from different people. Man, I have problems with this company. They don't want to pay claims. This company is easy to work with. Now, this might not be the truth everywhere in the world, but to tell you the truth, I've heard bad things about State Farm recently. And I've heard good things about like Travelers Insurance. I've also dealt with Travelers myself and been very happy. But you need to find out that information yourself. That's not necessarily ground truth, but that's a very good indicator. Now, another thing I want to talk about, because we're talking about fires today, right? I want to talk about when a tenant calls you. This is before a fire happened. A tenant calls you and he's worried about a electric issue, right? He's worried about, I smell something. I keep having a problem with the box tripping or this electric issue. Or when somebody talks about an electric issue, get that thinking in your mind. Oh crap, I want to prevent a fire. I want to get somebody out there and take care of this as soon as possible. I want to take this seriously. When there are electric issues, you get an electrician out there, someone who's licensed and someone that costs more than a handyman, and you get these things handled quickly. Just a safety issue, right? Avoid fires. Don't have the fire be because you didn't respond to complaints that your tenants had. You just don't want that issue. Now let's talk about renter's insurance, because boy, have I seen this matter in real life, right? People always say like, oh, do you require your tenants to have renter's insurance? And the answer to that is yes, I do. And in the case of the two recent fires I had, in one case, the tenant did not have renter's insurance, and that caused lots of problems and hardships for them. In another case, they had it and their life was a lot smoother. And I guess I can talk through that real quick. The issue with renter's insurance. Why would somebody want to have renter's insurance? Because when there's a fire and the place burns up, that renter is going to lose all their furniture, and your insurance, your fire policy or landlord policy does not cover their furniture. They might hope that it does. They might think it does, but unless you put that in the lease and or explain to them they're not going to know for sure. It's in my lease that their stuff isn't covered and that I require them to have renter's insurance. And they sign that lease and they initial that page. And when a fire happens, they don't have insurance, it's kind of on them. So that's one reason you need it. But what else can come from renter's insurance that's very helpful? Sometimes you can have temporary lodging built into it. What I mean by that is when a fire happens, right, when the place burns down, it's uninhabitable. What happens now? Well, for one thing, and you tell them this, it's uninhabitable now. The lease has ended. I'm very sorry. It's unfortunate. I've got to clean up this mess. I've got to take care of all of this. I have insurance for this. I'll be okay. But the lease is ended and you don't owe me any more money. But you won't be able to stay in this house anymore. It's not safe. We have to get you out. There's not going to be utilities. There's not going to be electricity. It's definitely not going to be gas, and might even turn water off. But they're going to ask like, so wait, where am I staying tonight? Are you going to put me up in a hotel, landlord? Because I feel like you should. Your house burned down and I have a lease with you. That's not really how it works in a landlord situation. You're not really responsible for housing them once it's burned down. Again, the lease is ended. It's unfortunate. They need to go find another place to live, and you need to get the place back up to rent ready again. And guess what? You're talking 3 months, 6 months, or a year down the road until you do. You're not talking about weeks. So they're out of the lease and, that's kind of over. Now, you don't put them up. You don't arrange for them to have another place to stay. If you really love them as tenants and they're great, you could see if you can get them into another one of your rental properties and sign a new lease. And then if they didn't cause the fire for sure, you can either return the deposit to them or take that deposit and put them in another one of your properties and just continue life with them as tenants. But of course, if there are any questions of that, if it could have been their fault, then you want to talk to a real estate attorney about what to do with your lease and when. It can get complicated, but probably the fire department is going to do an investigation and they're going to tell you like what happened and why if all that stuff's in question. You would probably wait until that's finished to decide what to do with somebody's deposit, with your tenant's deposit, who can no longer stay there, even though they may be demanding to get it back immediately. So there's personal property, and then there's potentially temporary lodging built into their renter's insurance, where they'd have a place to stay for a certain amount of time, hotel room, and even money for toiletries and clothes and stuff. I've actually seen that. In this particular case, I think my tenants had it through Alpha, and I think it worked pretty well for them. And then what if it was their fault? I believe that liability is built into some of these policies, and mine says that you have to be liable for up to $300,000 of damage. That's what my lease says for liability when the fire ends up being the tenant's fault. It's not necessarily that you're going to sue them for that money, but the insurance company may go after them for that money because the insurance has to pay you. So they're not really protected from you, they're protected from the insurance company, although they're not really going to see the difference and they're not going to like you if that happens. So I've gotten this call a few times. And in one case, I think 2 years ago, the two fires that I dealt with, I think were 3 months from each other. So like I dealt with a fire, it was kind of complicated, got through all the initial stuff. And then 3 months later, I dealt with another fire at another property and I knew what to do and I knew what to expect. And it was actually a lot less stressful. For me anyway. So what happens? You get that phone call, the house is on fire. There's smoke coming out. The fire department's here. The police are here. What happened? And they might even tell you like, oh no, I left the iron on, or, oh, I was doing something in the kitchen. I think I started the fire. That's kind of stuff might come up, all right? But you take all that in, what you should probably do, in my opinion, as a landlord, the right thing to do, morally, legally, ethically, just get over there, talk to your tenants. They're going to be standing out in the street, crying, hugging each other. Hopefully the police are there and the fire department's there. Go speak to the fire department, introduce yourself, give your card. Hopefully you find the person that's kind of telling you what's going on. Hey, and get that contact information from them because they're going to come up with some kind of report after they put it out. They're going to do some kind of investigation maybe. The insurance company eventually would do an investigation. Get everybody's contact information, talk with your tenants. You might have to explain to them in a very tactful and friendly and nice way, the lease is ended, of course. We can't and we won't charge you rent anymore. We'll work to get you back, deposit to you as quickly as possible. We'll have to wait for the fire department and the police to do a couple things maybe. You talk with the fire department, all that stuff. Now, what are the things you got to worry about? Well, when you're able, when the fire department's done doing their thing, like it's not hot anymore, it's not like dangerous, there's no smoke or fire anymore, there's potentially going to be broken windows and broken doors and holes in the building and who knows. If it's somewhat intact, and it can be closed up, you're going to want to close the place up. You're going to want to board it up. If you could board up damaged doors, board up broken windows, and just kind of preserve what's inside from being looted or people going in or people causing problems, you're going to want to pay someone to do that for you. That's one thing to think about. You're going to want to make sure that probably that day you're going to call your insurance company, right? When you call your insurance company, hopefully you have a contact at the fire department. Maybe or maybe not the police were involved. I think in my 2 cases, the police were not involved. You've talked to your tenants and you know where they're staying that night, what their plan is. You've talked through whether or not they have renter's insurance and whether or not they're going to have access to that kind of money, whether or not are going to get money from the renter's insurance to help them have a place to stay, or whether they're going to stay with friends. You understand what their plan is. Call your insurance company, give them all the information. They're going to probably wait until the fire department is done with their thing. They're like done with determining what happened. Fire department is probably going to take the power meter off the house, and that meter stays off until the city has blessed the whole house to have it put back on again. That's months away. But you'll get your insurance company involved. And when they can, they'll send somebody out. They'll have someone take a look. They'll look at your policy, right? They'll be sort of wondering, whose fault is this? How did it happen? They'll be asking you questions. And just give them the information that they need and let them do their thing. Let it work its way through the widgets. You might get passed around the insurance company. I remember like an initial person being involved and then having like some kind of adjuster come out who looked at it and tried to figure out how much money it was going to be and did a bunch of paperwork and map and graphs and stuff. And then I think maybe in the cases where it was bigger fires, they passed it off to, oh, this is a bigger loss. I'm passing it off to the next person on my team. He handles these bigger things. Eventually that person comes to you and says, yes, this is a total loss and here's the amount of money that you're allowed. And I remember them pulling up the information from my policy, which talked about the replacement cost value maximum that I had on my policy and saying, this is what it is. They determined that I need most or all of that money. And the way that they worked it was there's this thing called actual cash value that I talked about earlier, which is where they take the depreciated value of everything instead of replacement value, brand new value. The way that the insurance company gave me money was that the upfront money was the depreciated value of my entire policy. So maybe just think of that as they give you half the money up front that you'll need to fix the house. And then you're going to go out and you're going to find a contractor, right? This contractor, if I remember right, I don't know if this applies in every state or every situation, but they have to have a home builder license. So if you've got your handyman and you think you're just going to hire your local handyman to handle this for you, you're a little off. You need a bigger contractor who has a home builder license. And of course, you want someone that deals with insurance companies and deals with the city and the fire department on these issues all the time. Because when you rebuild a house or when you have a big job for a house, you have to apply for permits for different stages of the process. There's like a permit for the frame of the house. There's like a permit for plumbing if you have to redo it. There's a permit for electric at several different phases of the rebuild before you can get the power turned back on. And these things cost money. It costs money to do all this, and you need inspections from the city at various times. And this isn't something you want to mess with. This is something that you're going to pay the contractor for. Pay him with the insurance money, but pay a contractor with a home builder's license to handle all of this for you. One thing that I remember is the contractor, one of the first things he's going to have to do is he's going to have to like clean up the mess, depending on if he's like gutting the place or let's say he's not gutting the place, but he has to dry the place up. He has to get all the smoke smell out, which could be extensive. He has to take out rotten wood and stuff. There are companies that do this. One that comes to mind is ServPro. They're very expensive. I guess they're experts in doing this kind of thing. But I found with talking to contractors that a lot of times you can just let contractors handle all this, not use these expensive kind of like fire restoration companies like ServPro. I found them to be overpriced and overcomplicated. I'm not like the ultimate expert on this stuff, but this is just my experience. So I talked about how you're going to pick a home builder / contractor to do this whole job for you. This is going to be a long process, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Ask them how long it's going to take, but it's going to take a while. And you need to babysit the process. Like you need to get milestones from them. How long to do A, B, C, and D? What's the entire process until the end? What's going to happen at what time frames? And then while it's going on, you're going to see that that's slipping. You're going to see that they told you they'd have something done in a month and 2 months later it isn't done yet. You got to stay on top of them. You said this was going to be done in June. It's still not done. Can you devote more time to this. I drove by the property. I haven't seen you guys there all week. What are you guys doing? You have to babysit this. You have to push them. You need to stay on top of things so that it gets done in a timely manner. I found that if you just back off and let it go, because it's an insurance job, they're getting top dollar for working with you, by the way. They're getting paid top dollar. The insurance companies, in my opinion, they tend to overpay. They pay whatever the contractor charges as long as it's not highway robbery. But they also tend to put you on the back burner and take other jobs that will pay sooner, maybe. You've got to push them to get the job done in a timely manner and don't let them fall behind and babysit the effort. I've seen situations where they don't get pushed along, and I've seen something that should have taken 6 months take 2 years, and that's not the slightest exaggeration. Ask me how I know. The way that I talked about payments, right? You get maybe 50% up front of the whole thing. Maybe it's like $300,000. You'll get 50% up front, and you may have to give some or all of that to your contractor to get started. That's just something you got to work out with them. But what you want to make sure of is you want to explain this to the contractor, that you don't want to have to come out of pocket for this. So you want to set it up so that the money you have up front can last until they're done. And then when it's done and you turn in the final receipts, then the second half of the money comes in and people are paid off. You want to talk to your contractor about avoiding coming out of pocket for this stuff. You can also talk to your insurance adjuster about it. Have the insurance company and the contractor both assure you that you're not going to get stuck trying to come $100,000 out of pocket to bridge the gap between your insurance company getting you the money. That's just something that you got to think about. You shouldn't be required to come up with that money. The insurance company, working together with a contractor, making those two talk to each other, should be able to figure that out for you. Now, what kind of things is this contractor doing? You're babysitting the timeline along, but he's got to schedule all these different people to be in the house, right? He's got to work with the city on this whole thing. I talked about all these different permits that they call it pulling a permit, going to the city and getting a permit. And they might need your help to do that. Maybe you've got to fill out some paperwork so that the contractor can do that on your behalf. But work with your contractor on him getting the permits that he needs to do this all legally. He has to do it legally because the city has set things up in such a way that you never get your power back on until they've ensured that all these other things are done correctly through the city. And why do they do it that way? Because the city makes money from these permits. It's a money-making venture. That's why they make it hard and tedious and all that. They're making money off this. It's like their own little racket. Don't get me started. I think I talked about this earlier, but when the house gets rebuilt, it's a lot more expensive because everything has to be to code. And what that means is if the house is from 1940, it might have had a much older electric system. It might have had the old kind of pipes. It might have had like copper instead of like the modern equipment. The electric box was probably outdated and probably didn't have the right kind of safety mechanisms in place. The stuff inside was probably not grounded correctly. Like, totally different situation. So when you buy a house, you're allowed to have all those things that aren't to code because it's grandfathered. It was to code when the house was built, so it's okay now. But now that it's being rebuilt, it has to be rebuilt under all the new rules, which takes longer, is more expensive, is more time intensive, and requires a bunch of city inspections where they take their cut of your money. Now, when this is all over, you're going to have the insurance company is going to report to a bunch of different places that you had this expensive claim paid on this house. Does this come back to bite you? It does. When and how? Well, when you go to sell the house someday, and I'm going through this right now, whoever's buying your house, they're going to see all these claims. If there's more than one or there's an expensive one or whatever, they're going to see them. And it could make their insurance more expensive, or it could make their insurance company or certain insurance companies give pause to insuring the property, could delay a sale, could prevent a sale, could make things hard. That's one problem. Another problem is if you go to get insurance on another property that you buy or renew insurance, kind of like when you get a lot of speeding tickets, it's the same thing. Your rates could go up. They could raise the rates on you for that reason, or they could say, we don't want to insure you because you tend to have these expensive claims. You tend to have fires, like whether it's your fault or not. They might decide to insure you. They may decide to drop you from the current policy that you have. They're like, this policy runs out in 3 months, and guess what? We're not going to renew you. Like they might tell you that early on, or they might tell you that last second when you try to renew. So those are just things to worry about, to think about once you've had a fire and you've dealt with it and you're moving on with your life. Nothing in life is free, right? You can be happy that you got the insurance money and you rebuilt the place. It's probably worth a lot more now when you sell it because it's all modern and up to date. But you're going to take a hit on insurance prices. You probably are. in one way or another, the three ways that I talked about. You're dropped, your rates go up, or you have trouble selling the place. I probably missed some things, but that was my experience in having a few fires and the kind of stuff that I dealt with and what I remember and my wisdom. I hope it was helpful to you. This is Rich Carey from the Rich on Money podcast, signing off.